You wondering who will be diving into the stuffing less than 2 times? Or who will be eating more than 3 pieces of pie on Thanksgiving? Well, then you got to play the Pick 6 game from DraftKings. Your shot to turn a little cash into a lot. It's super simple to get started. First, download the DraftKings Pick 6 app, now available in Texas, California, and more. Then select between 2 or more players and choose if they'll have more or less than a certain stats, like yards or touchdowns, sacks, whatever. You choose if they're going to have more or less. And for the first time, Pick 6 players, check this out. New customers play $5. You get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use the code BALLERS. That's the code BALLERS for new customers to play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Bonus bets awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 30 days. Limited time offers. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
This episode is brought to you by Bleacher Report. How do you follow sports? From college football to the NBA, Bleacher Report brings you the latest news, live scores, and epic highlights from your favorite leagues, teams, and athletes, all in one app. Dive into exclusive shows hosted by your favorite athletes and original Bleacher Report series with breaking news, rumors, and predictions all season long. Download Bleacher Report to personalize your coverage.
The DFS Studio is brought to you by DraftKings. Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast with your hosts, Kyle Borganoni and Matthew Betz.
Welcome in. It's Friday, December 27th here on the Fantasy Footballers DFS and Betting Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Borganoni, and I am joined, as always, by Matthew. Santa's got a brand new bag, Betz.
Oh, baby. Christmas cash was had by yours truly. I've kind of been struggling in some tournaments this year, Kyle. Maybe I should just play the small slates. I had a nice little 2-game slate outcome yesterday. Thank you to Derrick Henry, Lamar, Pat Mahomes, Xavier Worthy, who we talked about on the Tuesday podcast. And then I was really happy that we were on Kelsey as a, if you're game log watching, it doesn't look good. But how long is that going to stay that way? So I played a lot of Kelsey and a lot of the guys that I just mentioned. So it was a really good Christmas slate for me, and I hope that we can continue it this week and this weekend, which there will be a 3-game slate on Saturday and then an 8-game slate on Sunday, 9 if you play on FanDuel, and of course, Monday night. So there is football all the time, and honestly, I'm pretty excited.
I did feel good about our process. If you listened to Tuesday's episode, we walked through those 2 games. If you just want to go back, just have a good time, like, man, those guys basically covered the game and shared the exact thoughts of what they needed. I mean, that was pretty good. And when we talked about Kelsey, it was that Bill Butler special. He was cheap, and that was really the play. So hopefully you carried home some Christmas cash. Hopefully this year, playing DFS, it allowed you to actually pay for Christmas. I know for a lot of our people in Discord, they said, hey, I actually got to set some money aside, and this really helped a lot for Christmas. So we are glad that you were with us. We are going to cover the main slate, and the main slate's a little different this week. I feel like I've had to shift my brain 38 times to figure out what is the main slate, which games are in it, which games are reigning, which games aren't. And it's about this time of the year where everyone and their mama figures out that they are a meteorologist by trade. That's just what they do now. So I feel like that's going to be a big story of this slate this weekend.
For sure. Yeah, there is. It's sort of an interesting slate, right? 'Cause this is the smallest main slate we've had all year. There's been slates where it's been 10 games, sometimes 11. When it's no teams on bye, we get the 13 or 14 gamers. This is an 8-game main slate on DraftKings, which is that in and of itself invites some variance. But when you look at the slate, there are, 4 or 5 games at this point with a total below 41 points, so 41 or lower. And that immediately says, okay, there's going to be 3 games that the field wants to attack in tournaments. And how do we go about doing that while also managing the fact that one of those games is played in the Dome, talking about Green Bay, Minnesota. The other games have a lot of weather concerns. So it is going to be, I think, a really tricky but really fun slate from a tournament perspective, because there's a lot of ways you can go to get off the chalk construction, some of the chalk plays as well. So yeah, that, and then on top of that, some of, like, when I was writing up the cash article on Thursday, I was kind of looking at, like, there's different levels to this, because you think about different motivations, not just for players, but also, like, some teams were just eliminated from the playoffs last week. Do they rest a guy that's 70% health that they would have played otherwise? Stuff like that to consider. So yeah, there's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts. As always, our best recommendation is to stay plugged into the DFS Pass and Discord as we get more information throughout the weekend.
I mean, we're not even talking about Week 18, where there are players in the pool that didn't even know they were invited to the group, and all of a sudden, like, hey, I'm in this group. I've been sitting around, 2,500. I've been the Stone Min tight end for a long time, and no one's really invited me to the party before. Congratulations. Next week is the dirty, dirty week, where I don't care who you are, you're going to be playing some people that are just some nasty players. So it is that time of the year where we transition from, here's how we play DFS, here's how we need to adjust for the weather, which I gave some pointers. We have some articles on our site. One of them is called Weather Really Matters. And another one called Does Weather Impact Fantasy Football Performance by the DeSorbo brothers. Check that out if you want to on our site. It's just fun to say that, DeSorbo brothers.
Those two.
Why are you
smart,
calling
man.
out the smartest people we've ever had as writers?
No, those two are. They both have their PhDs, is that right?
The older one is finishing his PhD. Sam's about to graduate eventually, but
okay.
No.
Shout out to the DeSorbos. Half joking that they were nerds. In all seriousness, they're great people, and they're so, like, way smarter than I could ever imagine being. So that's why I have to just dunk on them a little bit here.
With weather, it's so anecdotal of what you remember, and like in your lifetime bets, there were years where it's like, oh, remember when it rained a ton? Remember when there was snow? And there's things you remember as a kid of like, oh yeah, man, 94, what a year that was in Pennsylvania. I have
Who
no
could
idea.
forget? Who could forget, Kyle?
We did have a snowstorm in 92. That was a big deal here in the South. And then we had one a couple years ago where it was Freddie Freeman had to rescue Chipper Jones in the back of an ATV. That was all over the news. That was pretty cool.
Wow. What's the biggest snowstorm you've ever had down there in Georgia?
I think 92 was the one that affected me the most. That, like, it does, like, stand out as like, okay, this was a big deal, but it's not that big of a deal compared to the rest of the country.
So what's hilarious is I went to college in Virginia. I went to James Madison, for those that aren't aware. And I'm from middle of Pennsylvania, middle of the state. It's like 3.5 hours away. So it's not even that different of a climate. But like in Pennsylvania, and especially when I was in Vermont, it's like if it snows like a few inches to even like a foot, like you're probably going. You're going places. And when I was in college, I remember there'd be like a dusting and they're like, class is canceled. Like, we're literally walking to class. Like, what is happening? So, the South is quite soft, as I'll say, Kyle, when it comes to
How
to the snow.
dare you?
Yeah, I said it,
Dude, okay. Well, I hope you guys get your butt kicked in a couple different ways, especially in the college football playoff. When we know that teams from the South just show up, man. Don't mess around with that kind of stuff.
That's
You're
a different
feeling all
conversation.
good because you guys beat SMU or whoever it was.
That game, oh my gosh.
Betz was at that game.
I could not feel a thing by the end. It was so cold. Like the feels like was like 12. So we all had like 9 different layers on, and it was supposed to be a whiteout, but I don't own any heavy white, snow gear. So my father-in-law bought us all 4XL plain white t-shirts from Walmart. So we just put those right over top of all of our snow gear. Be a touchdown. You couldn't even lift your arms overhead because you're like a kid in a Christmas store. You're just like touchdown halfway up. So it was a fun game, man. Fun experience, fun atmosphere, but absolutely frigid.
Yeah. And I don't really know that life of...
I'm not going to lie. Like sitting at home with my dad's slippers on, the fire on, watching a game. It's just, the older I get, the more I enjoy that.
Yeah, no, give me the warm. And I get all seasons here, which is way better than Arizona, where it was just trash for part of the year. So Arizona's fun for part of the year, but not all year round. We do it well here in the South. So we will get to our picks. We'll get to everything else, but dfspass.com, all of our content if you want to get in on that.
Straight cash, homie.
There are a couple of injury caveats. You and I were looking at the practice reports. We were looking at reports about, hey, Joe Flacco taking first team reps today. That's going to change how we think about things because Anthony Richardson on Tuesday was our top quarterback. As of this recording, I would play him at 5,900, but if he's not starting, then we're not playing him. So just monitor that. Anthony Richardson, that'll be reflected in our best plays. It's a great price tag for a team that's still fighting for the playoffs. They were 8-point favorites, and we're going to wait on that. But I would say the other two, and by the way, Betz mentioned it's an 8-game slate, 9-game on FanDuel, a lot smaller player pool. So when you start to go through the options, you're like, man, where's the rest of the dudes here? Am I really paying up for Josh Allen? Am I really paying up for Jalen Hurts if he's in, there? It's like, okay. So I think the next best option for me is probably Baker Mayfield and their team implied total. It's at 6.9. I think that's a great tag. And you also have Sam Darnold here. I think he's fine too.
Yeah, for sure. We talked about, I think weather is going to be a big conversation from Friday all the way to Sunday at kickoff. This is one of those games where you don't have to worry about it at all, right? Green Bay, Minnesota, it's in the Dome. At Minnesota, Darnold's got all his guys. Hawkinson, Jefferson, Addison, Aaron Jones, all playing very well. You get a potential spot here where Green Bay is going to push back, I think. This game has the highest total on the slate. If it weren't for Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, we'd be talking a lot more about Sam Darnold for MVP, averaging over 8 yards per pass attempt, multiple touchdown passes in 11 of 15 games this year. He's just been rock solid. So I like him quite a bit at his price point for cash games and for tournaments, which we'll talk about too here in a minute. I do think, though, however, as of our recording, we don't know who or which quarterback is the play, but there will probably be a pretty cheap option opening up because of some injuries. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all today, Kyle, and see what your thoughts are, but it looks like Jalen Hurts is going to miss this game, not practicing again on Thursday, DNP on Wednesday. Very hard to clear concussion protocol if that is the case. So I think Jalen Hurts is going to sit here. Do you have any interest in Kenny Pickett or, heaven forbid, Tanner McKee if he is the one getting the start?
I can't do it, man. I'm sorry.
Real quick on that game.
Okay.
That I have it in our doc. This was literally as like an hour ago. It had a 41 total. Since the Hurts news has come out, it's dropped 2 points in the game total. So, and the spread's moving obviously in the favor of the Cowboys. So that game environment looks gross.
I mean, the Eagles, correct me if I'm wrong. I've looked at so many scheduled things this week. Like, they have to win. They win and they win the NFC East. But if
Correct.
They lose this game, there is still an outside shot that the Commanders can overtake them.
Well, that is if the Commanders can knock off the Falcons in prime time, Kyle, which imagine thinking that's going to happen. So yes, there is an outside scenario that happens. I mean, the Eagles are going to play their dudes to win this game if they're healthy. So Pickett or whoever it is will have A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, those guys. But still, like, the game total is low, highly volatile situation. I think if Hurts does indeed miss, I think Saquon is going to touch the ball 25 times in this game.
The grossest names going to, I mean, there's some gross names on this slate. I'm not playing DTR no matter what. I think he's the worst quarterback in the league. I hate Spencer Rattler. But if I'm really going down cheap, there's some dudes around 5K that, Mason Rudolph, AOC, Mac Jones, that you could tempt me on this slate. Okay, no other slate would I be like, okay. But like a cheap stacking option, we're not going to talk about that game. But I think Jacksonville, Tennessee has a sneaky spot where you single stack Mac Jones and Brian Thomas. You bring him back with Chig or Ridley, and you can do the opposite on the other side. So I could see those guys being in my top 5, like one of them eventually getting their price adjusted.
For sure. I mean, think about just like context of the slate, right? There's 16 total options that you can even consider on DraftKings at the quarterback position. That's just like not what we're used to. So you're going to get some gross plays. I think it's going to be a pretty low scoring slate just because of that. And a lot of these guys starting, I mean, you start to scroll down on DraftKings. Once you get below like Rodgers and Young, these are backup level quarterbacks, most of them on this slate, right? So like if you lose Hurts in that situation, it's like Josh Allen at the top, and then, the ceiling plays as far as rushing elite upside really is not there on the slate. So I would not be afraid in tournaments. We're talking about cash right now. I would not be afraid in tournaments to get different, get unique with your stacks. It's going to be a wild slate, in my opinion.
Yeah, and one other name, we'll talk about the game in a second. I just think Jordan Love at 6.2 is a solid tag for someone that we've seen have upside against the Vikings, and it's a dome environment. So we'll talk about that game in a second, but I think he's a good tag. Let's go over to running back. If you want to play Saquon at 8.6 and just say, not only is he chasing the record, but this team has to win, it's a good spot against the Cowboys, who we picked on all year as a run funnel. But he's 8.6, so it's a little expensive. If you start adjusting for salary, though, there's some guys in the 7K and then, of course, in the 6K range that are going to project really, really well at their price points. And I would say the one that's going to be at the top this week is our boy, Bucky Irving at 6.7. It's just a clean spot at home in a must-win game.
For sure, yeah. It's kind of been a little frustrating if you've been wanting Bucky to be like fully unleashed, but Rachaad White's still going to play roughly half the snaps. You're still going to see Rachaad White in obvious passing situations, but even with that being the case, over the last couple of weeks, we've still seen Bucky Irving be awesome for fantasy and be super efficient on his touches. Remember, this is the same matchup where he was the overall RB1 in on a weekly situation here against Carolina. They're favored. They got the highest team total on the slate. Speaking of motivation, the Bucs have to win, right, if they want to pick up the NFC South here. So they need to win this game. In that game, by the way, against the Panthers a few weeks ago, 25 carries, 152 rushing yards, 1 score, and 3 catches for 33 yards through the air as well. So Bucky Irving looks incredible this week, 6,700 taking on the Panthers.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about that game in just a second because it's clearly one of the best on the slate. It's got a great total. There's some cheap options, obviously, on the Panthers side that you can bring it back with. And last week we saw the Panthers can make some noise, right? Like the foregone conclusion was the Cardinals going to run away with this. This game's over and they won in overtime. So I'm excited to talk about that one. But I think at 6.7, he just feels so safe. I think he'll be probably the most popular running back in cash. Chuba in that game also is a great tag. Are you okay playing 2 running backs in the same game?
I think Chuba, he's interesting. Like from a field-based perspective, when you look at the matchup, you look at the situation, they're 8-point road underdogs against the Bucs defense that's been number 1 against the run in the last 6 weeks. I do not think it's going to be easy for Chuba Hubbard in this spot to do what he did last week, which was break the slate against the Cardinals. Not surprising. But in this game, I think the rushing component could be a struggle. I do think you'll still see him involved as a pass catcher. I mean, he's playing 90% of the snaps. There's like no competition whatsoever for touches, so it's a volume play at a really good tag for cash games. In tournaments, however, I'm not afraid to get away from him in this spot, just given, like I said, the matchup is tough. But for cash, it's hard to argue with the guy that is almost a lock for 15 touches, at least, like a floor perspective, at 7K. So it's a really good tag for a talented player.
I think you're going to see a lot of Panthers that show up. I mean, Thielen is going to show up on a lot of builds. And then even in tournaments, the cheap guys like Coker, David Moore. Do we have an update on Xavier Legette? I know it's kind of moving forward, but
yeah, he was back in practice on Wednesday. I haven't seen the updated Thursday report, but he was full on Wednesday. So barring a setback, he should be out there.
Yeah, there's just lots of different options there. All right, so Saquon I talked about, Devon Achane. I feel like we talk about him every single week. I want to go back and see how many times we've recommended him. 7,700 against the Browns. He catches about 6 balls a week. It's going to project really well. And then Aaron Jones at home in a revenge game, even though he already did his revenge earlier this year. I think 6.2 is just a fair tag for him at home. And I'm still shocked at that game line. We'll talk about it in a second, but he's going to project well.
For sure. Yeah. 6,200 for Aaron Jones is great. He's seen 21 and 23 total opportunities over the last 2 weeks. And we reference sometimes on our site, we have a metric that's the work percentage. Basically, it's how many rush attempts and targets of your team's overall share have you seen. 35% is an elite mark over the last 2 weeks for Aaron Jones. Now you get that dome game, best game environment on the slate, in my opinion. And like you talked about, the revenge, which we know this guy is just, it's Christmas and you should be in a good mood and, giving and all those things. But Aaron Jones has so much revenge in his heart this time of year for the Packers. In that first matchup, 139 scrimmage yards on 26 touches last time these teams played. So I think Aaron Jones is going to be there, getting all the high value type stuff. And again, you talk about motivation. The 1 seed is not out of reach with the situation that unfolded with the Eagles last week. If the Lions trip up here down the stretch, it certainly could happen, but motivation is still there for the Vikings to win this game.
All right, I want to give a couple of quick FanDuel tags. Bijan, because he's part of that Sunday night game, is expensive, but I mean, over the last month, he's averaged 26 opportunities per game, and Betz referenced the work percentage. He's seen 40% of the team's work, which is just wild, and Washington ranks dead last in adjusted yards before contact. So I think he's a solid play at a solid price. And then Alexander Madison is the grossest name I could bring up, but he is 5.7. The Raiders are at home. He saw 19 opportunities last week, and that is like such a cheap price tag against a rush defense that you can take advantage of. They're 26th against running backs, 28th in yards before contact. FanDuel only, 5.7. I'm going to hit the button because I can't talk about him anymore.
The holidays are about spending time with your loved ones and creating magical memories that will last a lifetime. So whether it's family and friends you haven't seen in a while, or those who you see all the time, share holiday magic this season with an ice-cold Coca-Cola. Copyright 2024, The Coca-Cola Company.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Apologies to you and your kin if you vomited on the floor of your, what are people driving? Their little Corolla. I once drove a
that was my
Toyota
first car.
Corolla. No, yeah, dude, an A to B car, right?
Not fancy. Just it showed up and got the job done. It's really funny. That car, I'll never forget this. So I'm pretty tall. I'm like 6'1". It's a smaller car. I had a 2000 Corolla. Okay.
Nice.
The upholstery piece at the very top of the roof would sag just a little. Obviously, I bought it used and very beat up. It would just like rest on the top of my head while driving. That was so annoying, but you'll never forget your first car. That's for sure.
Mine was a Honda Accord, but I did have a Corolla after that. And I mean, it's just like I'm in college. I'm just trying to get to one place. I wasn't trying to impress anybody.
Absolutely.
And it didn't work. I didn't impress anyone. I mean, it was just me driving around. But let's go to wide receiver. We always talk about the same price range. I feel like our listeners hate us, but it's one of those things where we're just going to keep talking about 5 or 6K wide receivers on DraftKings that see, I don't know, 9+ targets are just really good in cash. You're hoping for a ceiling outcome. And Brian Thomas Jr. has been one of those dudes that we keep talking about. We keep putting him in our pool, and we're going to keep talking about him on both sites. 6.8 on DraftKings, 7.5 on FanDuel. I mean, he's just going to project really well. It's against the Titans. He's played this team just, a couple weeks ago. So him and Ridley in the same game, I think are just solid at their price point. You will hate yourself if you play Ridley, but I have hated myself many times this year.
Remember, it's an 8-game slate. There's going to be some plays that are not, incredible. Like, it's kind of the nature of the slate. So, yeah, but I'm with you. These guys are both very strong at their price points. I love Brian Thomas Jr. this week. Just looking at kind of how he's performed in year one in the NFL, 2.36 yards per route run is an elite number for anybody, but a rookie especially. I mean, that is top tier company that we're talking about. He's joining this year. So you look at that, you look at the target competition, which is pretty much non-existent. He has seen an average of 12 targets per game since week 12. So Brian Thomas Jr., I mean, this price tag at 6,800 should be what, like 7,500 up to 8K for how good he's been and how much he's being used and the concentration of the targets in the offense. So Brian Thomas Jr. to me looks like my top wide receiver play, I should say, for cash games.
Yeah, and then take 6,800 and then think about it in the context of this slate, and you're like, I think I'd pay 7,500. I mean, he's probably worth up to 8K on DraftKings based on his metrics and everything else. So I think it's a good tag. Justin Jefferson at 8.3 is also too cheap for his skill set at home as the greatest home wide receiver of all time.
Yep, I'm with you.
So I'm not making him my slate breaker, but he could be.
But you're
And
not
you should play him this week.
making him your slate breaker.
I'm basically telling people there's a lot of splits that don't matter. But that is a split that every single time I go, wait, is he at home? Oh, I'm going to play him. And last week, he wasn't at home, and nobody played him, and we had him in our dart throws, which is wild to say a week after Jefferson and Addison were just like the plays and went off. Nobody played them at all on that slate. So I had a team where I played a Geno double stack with Jefferson as the bring back. I didn't get their running backs right, but I got that right.
Hey, that's a start. You could have played Jonathan Taylor.
No, I decided to play other players that weren't as good.
Oh, fun.
Well, it was more of like, ooh, let's get different here. I will try to get chalky here.
Yeah, that's what you do.
I know, and it didn't work. So Jefferson, BTJ, Thielen's going to be a good tag. He's going to be in the cash conversation. I wanted to bring up Jalen McMillan at 4.6. I feel like it's the right tag for him, for a guy that's been catching a lot of touchdowns, but his involvement is so much better, and we like that game environment. So I'd rather pay 4.6 in cash for McMillan than getting all the way up to where Evans is at 7.5. So
yeah, for
do you
sure.
feel the same?
Yeah, he's a great play this week. I definitely am interested to see, not that it matters like a ton, I'm just interested to see what happens with Sterling Shepard here, who left last week's game with hamstring injury, was also on the injury report with a foot issue. So you got those two things affecting Sterling Shepard. Cade Otton still not doing much in practice. So again, if he misses, the target competition is really Mike Evans and no one else, basically. So I like McMillan quite a bit. 4,600 is a really nice tag. Also lets just a lot of stuff work for cash games. And obviously the matchup against Carolina is very good.
Tell me what you think about this, because I'm trying to find some punt options for us. And as you scroll down, it's rough. The names I have in front of me, Darius Slayton, who we love. I feel like you and I have a kind of a soft spot in our heart. He's 3.3 if Neighbors isn't playing. He's at least somebody circled for me. Dontavian Wicks, if there's no Christian Watson, he's only 3.9. Wan'Dale Robinson also, if you really want 6 points or 7 points and you don't care about anything else in life, it's another name that's cheap. But anybody else you're seeing way down there?
So this one's tough because we're still waiting on final news, but Dontavian Wicks at 3,900 to me is a good, cheap way to get access to this game environment that we like. Against the Vikings, we know the game plan historically this year against the Vikings has been to up your pass rate and throw. And the problem with Jordan Love stacks recently is that the pass rate has just been non-existent because they've been beating every team by 14 points and not having to throw. We think they're going to have to throw in this game. And if Christian Watson does not play, who's dealing with a knee injury, the 3 wide receiver set should be Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs, and Jaden Reed in the slot. So, Wicks is a guy that we've counted on in the past. He's kind of let you down. It is worth noting when the last time these teams played, Wicks had a monster game, 13 targets in that game. That was outlier because they were behind from the get-go. The Packers were, and they just had to throw on repeat. But he can still earn targets. You saw that in the Monday night game. At 3,900, how bad could it really be to get access to one of Jordan Love's pass catchers? This is only if Watson is out for cash games.
Dontavian Wicks, how bad can it be? He will put that to the test, my friend.
Oh man, so the thing with Wicks, right? That's so hard to get away from is all summer he was the darling of best ball, right? It was
yes,
you don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen, and it kind of was right, but not really. So I also have that prior from he's been good going back to last year, earning targets.
Yes.
It's just that sometimes when they hit his hands, they fall to the ground.
It's an interesting archetype of a player who earns target at a high rate, and yet his catch percentage is 50% or whatever. And that's hard to happen. Usually it's the players that don't earn a lot of targets that get these downfield, Mike Williams is one of those guys who's never was going to show up as a high targets per out run guy, but his catch percentage is going to be down. You could explain that away. You're like, oh, these high 8-0 targets, who cares? Wicks is different. So it's an interesting archetype of a player that usually we would be like, ugh, but in DFS, we will definitely play him. On FanDuel, play Brian Thomas Jr., play Thielen. They are stupid cheap. There also is some interesting tags for guys like Tyreek, who we won't even talk about that game, but he's another player that you can definitely like play in a tournament and figure out. At tight end, I'm seeing a couple tiers here. I'm seeing if you want to play Brock Bowers because he's a wide receiver, then he's too cheap on both sites. I mean, he's just a couple catches away, which is wild, of breaking Puka's rookie record. He needs 5 catches this game. I don't know about you. I think he breaks it this week, Betz. So play Bowers if you want to spend up, but I think our boy Chig, which, man, been waiting for this victory lap after just living in the dumpster for 5 years. No, this isn't a victory lap. It's just more of like, good for Chig.
So funny how that was last best ball summer, right? Where you were just pounding the table for Chig. And, Kyle, as they say, never wrong, just early.
He was the piece you needed in 2024 at the very end, but just in this little stretch.
Yeah, your analysis from last summer was for this football season, obviously. Chig's been incredible. And the usage has been good, right? 10 targets 2 weeks ago, 11 last week. It's the Jaguars. Like, these guys always make me queasy when, like, the non-elite tight ends have this stretch that a down game is coming at some point.
Whoa.
Well, he is elite, obviously.
Okay, I was just making sure I heard correctly.
So I think a floor game might be coming sometime soon. However, for cash games, I think he's rock solid. He's a guy that I would definitely be mindful of roster percentages in tournaments. But for cash games, when we're talking about projecting 6-7 plus targets, that's a pretty strong play.
Yeah, you can feel the swell of Chig truthers. Chig Nation is just out there. Just we're having our party. We're by the fireside just dancing all night. But I know how this works, man. I know fantasy football, especially in DFS, because I think he's gonna be the most popular tight end on the slate.
Probably, yeah. I would say at least top 5, no question. Yeah,
in cash, I project him to be that, and I think he's probably going to end up in my roster because he just fits the price point. He's been seeing the targets. It's wild. I mean, he's been targeted over the last 3 weeks the same rate as Jamar Chase. So he's been that good for this team, and he's only 3.6. TJ Hawkinson is fine. I played TJ Hawkinson twice this year in cash, and I just keep waiting. It's like, dude, why don't they feed this dude? This is a good matchup. This is an over-under we want to. So at 4.5, he's great. And then talk to me about probably your new favorite player in the league.
Payne Durham. Bringing the pain, baby. If you're not aware, this was a former, I believe, 5th-round pick out of Purdue in 2023. Kyle, check me on that because that was from memory. But he stepped in last week. Oh, nice. He stepped in last week for K. Dotton, who did not practice Wednesday or Thursday this week. So if he misses again, Durham should be the starting tight end for the Bucs. Obviously, the matchup is incredible. And last week, without K. Dotton, he played 93% of the snaps, ran a route on 44 out of 50 Mayfield dropbacks, saw 7 targets. It resulted in less than 30 yards. But
that's so bad.
But at 2,900, again, we're asking ourselves at this price point, what do we need in cash? And I would say 6 to 8 points. And if the rest of your lineup does what it's supposed to, that would be fine. So obviously there's not a ton of ceiling. This is a guy that I would be very mindful of roster percentages for tournaments, but much like Chig, for cash games to punt it off, I think it's fine.
Yeah, I wrote in my write-up on FanDuel where he's only 4.6, which is a great tag. I said, at this price, we would basically poop ourselves for any type of involvement like he saw last week.
Yep.
So I get it. If you want to punt it off,
it
can work.
Real quick before we move on with those guys, would you play him with McMillan in the same cash lineup?
I think I'd be fine with that. I worry, though, because there's a certain point where you're going to have Bucky, McMillan,
that's what I'm saying.
Durham. I don't know if I want 3 Buccaneers. Probably cap it at 2 at cash.
I think I'm with you.
Okay. Defense, this is basically your section. I am just going to remove myself because I am so unbelievably biased. Just over the top biased about this section this week because in my main home league, which I know all of you are sick of listening, but come on, might win for the first time. I have hoarded defenses. I have been playing my fab left and right. I mean, I am just working the wire, and I basically picked up 4 of the top 5 defenses. They just happen to be the defenses that are good in DFS this week. It's the Colts against Drew Lock. It's Miami against DTR, so 3.5 and 3.2. Those are probably our top defenses that we would play. And then the Raiders are down there at 2.6, and I'm playing against the Raiders this week. So in other words, I'm playing all of the dudes this week and all of the teams, and it's a razor thin margin. So give me the take.
Well, in DFS, we do have to account for salary. So my favorite play of the bunch when you adjust for 3,500 for the Colts, 3,200 for the Dolphins, and 2,600 for the Raiders. I think my favorite is the Dolphins, even though they are more expensive than the Raiders, who all three of these plays are great. I mean, you're talking about Drew Lock, who, by the way, had an MRI on his shoulder last week. Drew Lock banged up. Starting center did not practice Thursday. Malik Neighbors did not practice Thursday. Tyrone Tracy didn't practice Thursday. Rain, wind, they look great. But you got to pay $3,500 for that in DFS. So save a few $100, you drop down to the Dolphins.
What if I pay $2 in Fab?
Okay, then I'm in. So here's what you do. This is how you sleep at night, Kyle. You play one of them in your home league. You play the other in DFS. No matter the outcome, you should be happy, right? And real quick on the Dolphins too, like Dorian Thompson-Robinson, to be kind, is a complete train wreck as a passer. Add in, he's dealing with a calf injury, and so you steal away his one thing potentially that he can do, which is run. If he is stuck in the pocket against this Dolphins pass rush, which has been top 10 in pressure rate this year and even better recently, it could be a complete train wreck without Cedric Tillman, potentially no David Njoku. The list goes on and on. They're both incredible plays. I think the Dolphins are my favorite, followed by the Colts, then the Raiders, adjusting for salary.
That didn't help me.
Why?
Because now it's just reminding me that all three of these are good plays, and I could see a route for all of them. It was more of like, which one do I think is the worst at their job? And I think it's DTR.
Yep, it's not good.
I think that's what it is. And Miami's been really good against the run. So if, our boy Uncle Jerome doesn't get things going, they could be in trouble.
I mean,
Real
DTR,
trouble.
in his starts, going back to last year, okay, we talked about it previously. He's now up to like 4.2 YPA career in the NFL. But the Browns have scored this past week 6 points, 3 points, 13 points, 12 points in his starts. It's not great.
I know, but Drew Lock's also bad at his job.
And banged up. And what's interesting about, I keep talking about this, it's so funny. What's interesting about the Colts, they are still mathematically alive. It's very unlikely, but they are technically still in it to make the playoffs. So they're going to play all out to win. The Giants, however, they want to lose no matter what to get the number one pick, right? So maybe the Colts are the play. People are all gonna be stressed about like optimal DFS lineups and stacks on Sunday morning. And Kyle's just like, which DST do I play?
And they're gonna each score like 6 or 7 points, and it's not gonna matter.
Correct.
All right, let's move on.
Stack Attack.
All right, sorry to take a little time for my own selfish moves, but come on, Team Big Chunk. It's my team. We're right there. All right, so Betz talked about it earlier. The slate context is we have 8 games here, 9 if you play on FanDuel. A lot of them have some terrible totals. Right now, 5 of the 8 have totals at 41 or below. So we're dealing with not optimal environments. We're also dealing with weather. And so when I was looking at the pace of play this week, which is super abbreviated, it's been a crazy week for Betz and I to get everything. There are some games that stand out above the rest, and we wanted to talk about them here. So the first game is Green Bay at Minnesota. But I need you to explain to me, like I'm 5 years old, why the Packers are favored by 1 point on the road. The over-under is 48.5, so it's great. It's in a dome, with the Vikings on the doorstep of potentially being the number 1 seed in the NFC. Why is this team favored?
I mean, folks, you heard it right there. You know exactly what the play is. Kyle just gave us the answers here. Log into your sportsbook, you place the wager. So Kyle's clearly on the Vikings here at home to pull off the upset.
You would too. Why the heck is this line this way?
I don't know, dude. I'm not that smart, man. I can't understand the algorithms or any of that stuff. I think it's a pick 'em. Like, these teams are so evenly matched, in my opinion. The Packers have been playing great. Now their schedule has been pretty favorable recently. The Vikings, at home, if I was going to account for some home field advantage here, I think the Vikings should be a very short favorite. So I see what you're saying, but I think it's a pick 'em, kind of regardless. But yeah, the line is definitely interesting with Green Bay being favored by 1 point here.
So these two teams played in week 4. The Vikings won by 2, but if you go back, there was a late touchdown to even get it this close.
Yeah, garbage time.
Yeah, I mean, the Packers were trailing the entire game. It doesn't really reflect how that game actually played out. Now, Jayden Reed balled out. Wicks had 2 touchdowns. Kraft had a touchdown. Love was great and also terrible. He had 3 INTs and 4 passing touchdowns. I think there's a lot of value in this game. The most expensive player is Justin Jefferson, but apart from him, if Josh Jacobs isn't going to carry a lot of roster percentage, I think there's a ton of value to double stack aside and then figure out 1 or 2 bringbacks. Like, this is a game that I would just be interested in going overweight, and it's early for us to look at roster percentage. I mean, we barely got past Christmas and those games and Beyonce and everything else there, that to move our brains into thinking of what's a roster percentage going to be after Thursday's games and Saturday's games, there's a lot of changes. Do you think this game is going to be super popular?
Yes, very popular, because half of our cash picks were Vikings.
Popular.
Right. Darnold's in the cash conversation. I wouldn't fault anybody for playing Jefferson in cash. We talked about TJ Hawkinson, Aaron Jones. Basically, everybody is cash viable on the Vikings. We didn't really mention Addison. So I'm super intrigued to see what his roster percentage comes in at, because if he is the leverage play on his teammates, a love stack with like Addison as the bring back instead of Jones or instead of Justin Jefferson or Hawkinson makes a lot of sense to me. So yeah, I think there's so much to like about this game. The Vikings side, it's pretty clear like who the plays are. On the Packers side of things, I'm really, really interested in Jordan Love stacks, because when you look at game logs and kind of how they've played, I mentioned it, this past Monday night was the perfect example of how they've been playing, where they don't have to push their guys in the second half. They can sit on a lead and just feed Josh Jacobs. I don't think they're going to be able to in this spot. And you've seen teams have to throw a ton on the Vikings. We took an over on Jordan Love's pass attempts for props this week. We just think this is going to be a completely different look for the Green Bay Packers offense. And so I like stacks with Jayden Reed, who I know in DFS, like, it's so different than season long, where you have this like emotional frustration of putting him in your lineup every week. We don't care about that in tournaments, right? We only want those right tail outcomes. And we've seen Reed be a massive type of guy in the right situation. The way you beat the Vikings was with quick hitters, guys like Jayden Reed, who can win on design targets and, end arounds and quick hitter slants, stuff like that. Like, I think Jayden Reed is probably one of my favorite plays on the slate for tournaments, assuming Christian Watson does not play.
Don't worry, he's in my home league team too. So
perfect. We can count on him for a cool 6 points.
Yep, he's going to be fine. No, it's a great tag for him and his skill set. I mean, the Packers are 6th best in EPA per play as an offense. Like, it's a good offense on both, no matter what way you look at it. So, yeah, I like Jordan Love double stacks as well. And you can get creative. Like, all the players on the team kind of end up cannibalizing each other's roster percentage. So Kraft's never going to get out of control. No one loves playing Dobbs because you're just always guessing on touchdowns. And then same thing with Wicks. So I think that the Packers side won't get out of control from a stack up side. I think there are going to be lots of bringbacks if they stack up the Vikings side, but I think you do get leverage if you stack up Jordan Love. So what about the running backs in this game? Josh Jacobs has been awesome. He's been really, really good. He's been the workhorse, and he's expensive. Like, that's the only thing that I think is holding him back in this game of being a play that I really like.
Yeah, I think for me, if I'm going to play him, I prefer to do it on FanDuel. The price is basically the same, which is a really nice value, relatively speaking, where he's $8,300 on FanDuel. He's $8,100 on DraftKings. Just given that, like, FanDuel is just, I think, fits his skill set so much more, where it's just like, hey, can you give me, in this tough matchup, if he gives you like 70 yards on the ground, but he falls in the end zone twice, like on FanDuel, that's going to be very, very nice at that tag. So yeah, he's a tough play. I mean, the matchup is not great. Minnesota's been incredible against the run. We also think that the Packers are going to up their pass rate here. So I would say in general, I'm lower on Jacobs, but this is an 8-game slate where there's not a ton of scoring projected, right? You just talked about that. 5 of the 8 games have a 41 or lower total. So like, there's going to be teams on the slate that score 1 touchdown, in their games. So like, we need to rethink how we think about this. So on a bigger slate, Josh Jacobs would be like a probably no thank you type of play. But if he's going to get nothing in roster percentage because of the fact that it's a difficult matchup, I do think he's just a close your eyes, bet on the talent, bet on the team situation, but only if he is low rostered for me.
The only thing I will add to this game is that both of these teams are bottom 5 in neutral situation pace. So at the end of the day, I think what the Packers want to do is slow the game down. They don't want to be in a track meet, but they couldn't afford to do that when these two teams played in week 4. So if you have builds where you'd say, hey, I think the Packers get the leader, this is close, but the overall play volume goes down, then you can get a lot of leverage in this game if it is going to be this popular, and you'd end up playing somebody like Jacobs as leverage on the rest of the field. So keep that in mind, but give me your Vegas take, because you know mine.
Man,
this
is tough.
I'm just taking, the over.
Well, real quick, I'm also seeing Jerry Alexander potentially not playing again.
Does that guy play in the league anymore?
Not recently. So you add that in. It's tough. I'll tell you what. Give me the over. These offenses are both just humming. So over 48.5.
Okay, just bit aside. Were you shocked when you logged in? Which I'm assuming you were always logged on, and you saw that this was not Minnesota favored.
I was surprised, yes.
Okay. That's all I needed. I needed a little assurance of doing this for my job that I wasn't crazy to log in and see is it Packers fans just throwing some money down?
Sounds like you're throwing some money down on the Vikings. Well, Kyle will be in his living room on Sunday doing the skull chant.
My next door neighbor he's a huge Vikings fan. He owns a Vikings brewery here.
I like Vikings fans. They're fun. A lot of passion.
You respect that, huh?
I respect it. Falcons fans?
Which fans do you not like, man?
Cowboy fans.
Everyone hates Cowboys fans.
Yeah. That's all right. Everybody hates the Eagles fans too.
Yeah, Eagles are the worst. Next game, two teams that clearly are not in first place in their division. The Carolina Panthers at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers are 7.5-point home favorites. The over-under is 48.5. It's the highest total of the week. We like this game environment. We like the Buccaneers. I would say that I think the Buccaneers are more deserving to go to the playoffs than the Falcons. I'm just going to say that. Maybe my Falcons fans won't like that, but I just think that's where they're at. This seems really, really clear that the Buccaneers would just win at home in a must-win game to keep pace. And Carolina's rush defense is one that we've talked about too many times this year. Dead last in rushing yards per game allowed, 31st in EPA per rush. And I found this stat out. Teams are running the ball 51% of the time against Carolina. That's the second highest rate of any team over the last decade. So that's my only concern. The problem is, though, like you can say, like, oh, they're going to run the ball. There's not going to be a lot. Like, Tampa Bay's also been efficient as an offense. So they could run the ball. They could score 28 points like their team implied total says, and 2 or 3 guys get there on the Buccaneers side.
Definitely, yeah. And like I said, if some of the teams on this slate just fail and they don't score a ton of touchdowns, but the Bucs put up 30, you might need $3, to win in tournaments. So that's my strategy on the slate, is just try to find the teams that I think have a realistic chance to put up touchdowns here and put up points. And obviously the Bucs are on the short list. Yeah, so 7.5-point home favorites, highest team total on the slate. Bucky's great. I think Mike Evans is an incredible play. We already talked about Jalen McMillan and Payne Durham. So it's like everybody's in play here. And Baker, I do think he gets played a little bit, but I don't think he's going to be one of the most popular plays, maybe like 10%, which on an 8-game slate isn't that much. So I think playing some Baker doubles, Baker triples on a small slate like this are very much in play.
Biggest issue is just seeing which Bryce Young do you get. Do you get one that kind of is able to keep them somewhat close? This game remains competitive, or do you just see the Buccaneers slow the entire game environment down? They're also bottom 5 in neutral pace. So you could see a ton of Bucky Irving. I think Rachaad White's an interesting pivot in this game. He's 5,700 and his usage has been there. And then I did a sick thing where I was like, you know what? Like, he's been getting a lot of targets. We know targets are valuable. And so we talk a lot about weighted opportunities. He's actually averaging more weighted opportunities per game this year than Bucky. And so there is an opportunity where this game stays close and White ends up with a goal line touchdown. He gets 5 receptions and he's really valuable, 5,700, and leverage on a player that Bucky is, going to be super popular. So I just wanted to mention White as I think he's a good play.
Yeah, I think in large field, it's a really good play. I mean, in small field, you're giving up, I think, too much projection for the stuff I play. But like in large field, I mean, what, 30% for Irving, 35%? And like, I think White could come in like 6%, something like that. So I do think it's a really strong leverage play. Matchup's just as good for White as it is for Bucky, right? But he's going to be played at a fraction of the roster percentage.
What are you doing with the Buccaneers options? We talked about Jalen McMillan, Payne Durham being cash options. I do think Evans is going to catch some roster percentage. He's not just going to go unnoticed in this game, but how would you stack up this side? If you wanted to go Baker, would you go Baker, Bucky, and Evans, or is that too much roster percentage in one?
I think you could do it. I think Evans is going to be one of those guys that gets up to like 15 to 20. But again, on a small slate, like again, it's not 12 games, it's not 14 games. This is 8 games. And there's like 4 or 5 of that. I'm like, I have zero interest in these players, right? So you understand why they get inflated, but it's not like Evans is going to push 30%. So yeah, I think Evans is an awesome play on this slate at 7,500 taking on Carolina's. I think Baker with Bucky is good. I think Baker as leverage, with Evans and Durham or Evans and McMillan is good. There's a lot of ways to play it, which I think is really fun. So for me, if I'm running 150 or a 20 max, like I think having different exposures to Baker stacks is a good way to bet on the Bucks with the understanding of any of these guys could pop off for a big game.
Do you need a Panther as a bring back? Like that's what the only thing I'm worried is that people will stack up this game and say, okay, I have to have a Panther here. And every single lineup ends up having a Panther when there's outcomes where this team scores, what's their team implied total right now? Like it's 20, like let's say they hit the under, they hit 17, 18 points. It's not a team that you'd necessarily need. And let's say the touchdown gets spread out. So I'm worried about the wide receivers that Thielen ends up being fine for cash. Let's say Leggett catches a touchdown, but he's like at like 10 points. And then at the end of the day, it's like, is anybody that helpful?
Yeah, for sure. And I think in that scenario, all these guys, like you said, could be fine, but not worthy of tournament upside type stuff. So betting against that, if it follows roster percentage, is a nice way to do that. The guy that is going to be very, very chalky, Chuba will be, but also Adam Thielen. So Thielen feels like a really strong cash play, one that if he gets to 20, 25% in some of the smaller stuff I play, I'd like to come and underweight that.
Yeah. Thielen on FanDuel 6,200 is another great tag. So it's hard getting away from him, from projection, from looking at, adjusting for salary and opportunities. Like he's going to show up really well based on his target share since he's returned. So Thielen's a fine play, but just a little weary. Any other thoughts on this game?
I don't think so. I mean, you could throw a dart on Coker or Leggett, depending if you want to take the upside swing. But like Kyle said, it's just there are paths where this does not work for Carolina, and this is a rematch. The motivation is there for the Bucks, so I think it's a decent spot to fade.
All right, I think the Bucks take care of business. Like the 7.5 is not a great line, but I think they take care of business.
I'm with you.
All right, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by AWS. Amazon Q Business is the new generative AI assistant from AWS. Many tasks can make business slow, like wading through mud. Help! Luckily, there's a faster, easier, less messy choice. Amazon Q can securely understand your business data to help you streamline tasks, like summarizing quarterly results or doing complex analyses in no time. Q got this. Learn what Amazon Q Business can do for you at aws.com/learn more.
Over the last 16 years, the Subaru Share the Love event has helped support over 134,000 animals, grant more than 3,600 wishes, provide more than 4.6 million meals, and help protect over 400 national parks. When you buy or lease a new vehicle during the Subaru Share the Love event, Subaru and its retailers will donate a minimum of $300 to charity, making an even greater impact. Support a great cause today at Subaru.com/share.
We got a couple more games we're going to preview, and then we will talk about our slate breakers and our pick 6 picks. This one is the Jets at Buffalo, and really, we're talking about Buffalo because they have a 28-point team implied total. They're favored by 8.5. The over-under is 47. This is another game that when you look at the forecast, most of them say there's definitely going to be rain. Definitely going to show up. So that does affect some things. And I mentioned earlier, we have some articles on the site that heavy rain plus wind gust is something that we usually care about. So any updates? Well, it looks like you're updating the line as we speak.
Yeah, move towards Buffalo. So it was 8.5 this morning. As of our recording, that's out to 9. Also, the total has dropped a half a point, sometimes in some spots a full point. I think, like you're talking about, some of the weather concerns. So yeah, now Buffalo favored by 9. The total that I see is 46.5.
I think the running backs are the easiest clicks in this game. I think Breece Hall's a fine tag, and Buffalo's been one of those teams that we keep attacking in the run game over and over and over again. I mean, they're allowing the highest explosive rush rate in the NFL, 27th in yards before contact, and they've allowed the most running back receiving yards in the NFL. So I think Breece is you probably forgot about him and you don't want to play him anymore, but in DFS, on the road, in a probably wet environment, I think Breece is going to see a fine workload. And James Cook, our boy, is another fine play as well, if you want to look at him there.
Totally. Yeah, Breece is interesting, right? Because, we talked a little bit about just returning from a knee injury. It's the same knee that he had the ACL surgery on. Did they just move on to next year and shut him down and see what they have in Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis? And they said, no, we're going to give him even more of the backfield in meaningless games. 77% of the snaps last week and 14 of the 19 running back carries. So, yeah, if you told us right in week 1 and 2 where we were drafting Breece Hall as a top 10 pick in fantasy that you're going to get him at 6,300 in a weather game, you'd be like, sure, I'll play Breece Hall. Yet on this slate, because Aaron Jones is 6,200, because people are going to play Bucky, Chuba, those kind of guys, I think Breece Hall is an interesting play just as a leverage point on that price. And, we talked about the matchup with the Buffalo Bills for most of the year. They want to funnel stuff in the middle of the field, keep everything in front. You could see more volume for him in the pass games, especially. So I like Breece Hall quite a bit for tournaments this week.
Yeah, this game is interesting because I can't really talk to you about any Buffalo pass catcher and have super confidence. I can't say here's the matchup for this and here's why. So I'm not really going to go anywhere. Shakir is fine in PPR, but another thing, if you don't get a touchdown, you're not going to be happy in a tournament. So where else are you going in this game? Is Josh Allen, is he going to catch much roster percentage?
I mean, on this slate, because it's so small and we're probably losing Jalen Hurts, I think people will tell themselves a story where it's if you want ultimate ceiling, just go up to Josh Allen, because a lot of people are going to be playing, I don't know, Mason Rudolph and Dorian Thompson-Robinson and those types of dudes. So I think he'll get a little bit more than we're projecting right now. But because, again, it's not comfortable to spend up at quarterback, I think it will be lower than it should be, especially on FanDuel, where you can fit him a little bit easier. He's 9,100. I just think, again, the Bills have motivation to win this game. The MVP chase, Lamar makes it interesting every time he plays. Let's see what Josh Allen can do. In a game where it should be windy and rainy, Allen can win in that environment. He can run enough to do it. So I think Allen naked is totally fine, just like last week and the week before. I think Allen with James Cook is fine if you just think that the Bills get all their production on the ground and those are the guys that run it in. Because like you said, it's just a whack-a-mole each week at wide receiver and they do a full-blown rotation. It's just hard to get a read on it. So for large field, sure, stack him up and hope you hit the dart. In small field, I think it's totally fine to play him naked or with James Cook.
Yeah, MVP market, last time I looked at it, he's minus 240. So he was minus 600 or whatever he was a couple weeks ago. And Lamar's plus 180. So that's interesting. The Bills defense has given it up over the last 6 weeks. We remember Lions game, Rams game, and last week they had a tough time putting away the Patriots. They're 28th against quarterbacks, 30th against wide receivers, 25th against tight ends over the last 6 weeks. So you can tell yourself a story on the Jets side that all of them deserve to be bringbacks. The three main guys, Breece, Devontae, Garrett Wilson. And I think any of them could actually go off in a meaningful way. So do you have a take on Devontae? Garrett Wilson is so cheap compared to his upside. He has just one top 20 finish over the last 6 weeks. So you haven't really seen a ceiling since Devontae's been going off, but I still want to go back there in tournaments.
Definitely, yeah. And I think, there's been a lot of stuff. He's kind of publicly talked about some frustrations with the team and, getting the ball and all that sort of stuff. Devontae banged up. He did come back to practice today on Thursday, but he was on the injury report with a hip issue. So there's ways where you could tell yourself a story on Garrett Wilson. Yeah, 6,100 on FanDuel, 6,900. That's a really nice tag for Garrett Wilson. So I do think, this is a potential spot to go to him as leverage off Devontae, but certainly projections are going to like Devontae just because he's done what he's done, over the last month.
All right, so the line's at -9. The Jets, man, I don't know how to read the Jets at all.
Nobody does, Kyle. It's fun.
Did you remember that at one point this offseason they were favored by the books to win this division?
So it's so wild how much changes in the NFL, and that was only a couple months ago. But like, imagine this team in its current version being favored to win. Yeah, 9 it's a lot of points. I'll tell you what, I'm going to take the Jets team total under. That's my play here.
On the road, at Buffalo, in the rain.
Rodgers has a knee injury.
They hate themselves.
Yeah. Locker room vibes are great.
Yeah, I mean, the under is definitely in play here. This is a game that I probably won't be fully stacking up, but I think there's some good correlation plays here. And I get what you're saying about Allen. Like, if people think, oh, I need to pay up somewhere. So that makes sense. All right, last game we're going to cover is for FanDuel only because we love those people, but also because the Atlanta Falcons, the division leading Atlanta Falcons, will be traveling to Washington on Sunday night. It's a great game. Washington -4, over-unders 47.5. This one's going to have rain. There's also a lot at play here where it's like, the pace just going to be down. Like, Washington's one of those teams that they're the highest in no huddle rate, and yet they also play slow. Yeah, they're efficient, and yet like there's also a lot of times where they just kind of suck the overall play volume out of the game. On the Falcons side, Bijan's been a guy that we've been, saying over and over again. I talked about him in cash. I think he's a good play. But other than that, it's really hard to see upside for anybody else here. I mean, with Penix, there's just so much we don't know. Now, he looked fine last week, except for Kyle Pitts didn't really care about him at all. Decided to give him his first interception. But what's your take on this game and how you can kind of use it as like, it's almost like because it's there in the Sunday night, people can kind of forget about it, but it is fun playing on FanDuel as having a late night hammer.
Yeah, and it just gives you one more game to try to attack in tournaments where, we mentioned how kind of gross the slate is on DraftKings. This one still has a 47.5 total as of this recording, which is right up there with some of the best games on the slate. So on FanDuel, I think it's very much in play as a tournament stack. Looking at kind of how I think the field's going to play this game, Jayden Daniels at 8,500 because of his running and all that sort of stuff, very much in play. I think even in cash games, you could play him. I don't think people are going to play Brian Robinson Jr., who was a complete disaster last week. I had him in one of my semifinal matchups, so felt that was a complete disaster, but nobody's going to go back to him, so he's interesting. And on the Falcons side, I think Bijan is an unbelievable play. Teams have attacked Washington with the run for most of the year. They faced the second lowest pass rate over expectation on the entire season. In a must-win game, when the chips are down, I think you're seeing a ton of Bijan here instead of Algier. You still have your rookie quarterback making his second career start. So Bijan, to me, I think is just an outstanding play over on FanDuel. Not like you're going to sneak him by anybody, but I'm seeing currently projected right now about 14 to 15%. That feels too low in this spot. So I like Bijan as the late night hammer over on FanDuel.
Yeah, I mean, the way that you attack the Falcons is through the air. So there's a lot to like with Terry McLaurin at 7,900. Revenge game for Olamide Zaccheaus.
So much revenge. He's been waiting. He had this one circled on the calendar.
Dude, I played him last week. It was really fun.
You played Zaccheaus?
I did.
You were sick. You were so sick.
It was one of those things where I was like, you know what? I'm going to pay up. I got Jaden, Zaccheaus, Saquon. We're cooking. And then it didn't matter because there were so many other running backs that went off on the slate that you could have an outcome like that and it still didn't end up mattering. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good plays here. I think Ertz is fine. You can go right back to him if you want to at 5K on FanDuel. That's a fine tag for his involvement in this game. But I think if I was looking at this in tournaments and comparing it to the rest, it's a Jaden skinny stack. Bring it back with Bijan.
That's my favorite way to play it as well. I will say we're still monitoring Drake London. He said on Thursday he does expect to play, but just make sure you're monitoring that situation. If for some reason he'd get ruled out, Darnell Mooney would be an awesome play. Not just for tournaments, but stop playing cash games. I think even in tournaments, Mooney is like, if you're behind and you need a late swap guy that nobody is playing this week, It's Darnell Mooney, who, 6 targets last week with Penix. You could do worse, especially for his downfield role. So I like Darnell Mooney this week.
All right, I will be taking the under of this game and totally unbiased, Atlanta +4.
Kyle.
But I would take the under.
Commanders -4.
You're probably right. Or we're both wrong. It's possible for us to both be wrong on this.
What did you think was the play?
I don't really have a take on the line. I just said under.
Okay. You like the under?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, based off our, just super sharp size and totals betting, this game is guaranteed to be, I said Washington -4. It's guaranteed to be Atlanta +4 and the over for sure.
Slate Breaker of the Week.
Last week, Betz knocked it out of the park with Jonathan Taylor Thomas. It was great. And I want to go back because I feel like Slate Breakers, this has been probably our best year of identifying like who the dudes are. I mean, sometimes you get players that are good. I had Amon-Ra the week before, which is just, you needed him. He was the piece you needed. JTT was the piece you needed. And so I think we figured it out. So I will be talking about, I'm going to hate myself next week, Calvin Ridley as my Slate Breaker of the Week. One, I think a lot of Chig lineups are going to show up. And so I think that you can get some leverage over Chig. But in Mason Rudolph games, so that's week 7, 8, 9, and the last 2 weeks, 15, 16, he is crushed versus man coverage. He's seen 54% of the team's air yards, 41% of his targets, and he's been targeting 40% of his routes. And Jacksonville plays the second highest rate of man and gives up the most fantasy points per dropback versus man coverage. I think Ridley can give you that, and his price is still way down there. I think Ridley can be a difference maker this week.
Yeah, I like it. I'm with you on the leverage over Chig. Makes a ton of sense for tournaments. So, I feel pressure, Kyle, after last week.
You should.
And I'm sorry for the DraftKings people, but I'm going with Bijan on FanDuel. Just the matchup is it's too good. Like I said, must-win game. Give it to your best players. Don't overthink this. Washington, dead last in yards before contact per attempt allowed, and teams are choosing to attack Washington on the ground. You have a rookie quarterback. Why not feed your best player? And I'm looking at roster percentage right now on FanDuel. It's like, Bucky at 20+%, Devon Achane, Chalky, Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, Aaron Jones, Chuba. All those guys are getting massive roster percentage. Nobody wants to spend up for Bijan at 8,900. Slate breaker this week.
Yeah, I mean, the Falcons are rolling, man. They've won 2 in a row.
You definitely trust the Falcons to show up in big spots. They've never let you down in the past.
Well, what if I told you that I have Bijan also on that team?
It's time for Borg versus Betz, presented by DraftKings.
No sportsbook, no problem. You can play DraftKings Pick 6 with us. And yes, I wish I could give a Bijan prop because I will be glued to my TV that Sunday night. Jaden Daniels, Bijan on my home league team. Everybody that's anybody is on this team, man. It's what's everybody talking about.
For my sake, that on Tuesday you're a champion. I don't have to hear you mope around all week on this podcast.
I won't show up if I lose.
I don't doubt that.
No, I'll show up. Last week we were 2-2 on the season. We're 58% on our pick sixes. The first one I'm going to give is Bryce Young. More than half an INT. It's -130 on most books, but remember on pick 6, you don't have to pay that. He's averaging 1 per game on the road this year, 58% completion percentage on the road in his career, and he's one of just 4 qualified quarterbacks to have thrown more interceptions than touchdowns from a clean pocket, joining the likes of Dak Prescott, Gardner Minshew, and Anthony Richardson.
That is great analysis, Kyle. I'm going to take Chuba, less than 74.5 rushing yards. We just talked about that matchup a little bit. What's that?
Sounds like we don't like the Panthers.
Yeah, it seems like that way, doesn't it? Already mentioned the matchup in their game preview. Just the Bucs' run defense has been great. They're number 1 in yards per carry allowed of the last 6 weeks, number 1 in EPA, 3rd in success rate. And if you remove the games where he's just seen outlandish usage in the rush game, like 28, 26, 25 carries, which I would be shocked if that happens this week, he's been under this line in 8 of 12 games. So give me the under on Chuba.
I was going to give Jonathan Taylor's under on his receiving yards at 6.5 because he has 14 total receiving yards over the last 6 weeks. But with the news of Joe Flacco, I'm kind of just waiting on that news. It does change. But I did want to give an official prop here from me. This isn't like a bonus. This is like, I mean it. Cam Little. That's right. The kicker for the Jaguars over his kicking points at 6.5. It's minus 125 on most books. Their team implied total is 20. And Cam Little, I don't know if you know this, Betz. He is the youngest kicker ever drafted in the common draft era. He was only 20 years, 8 months, 10 days old on draft day. He is an elite kicker with a breakout age that just smashes all of the spreadsheets. He was perfect on his extra points in 3-year career at Arkansas, and he's been awesome this year. His only 2 misses were 48 and then above 50 yards. Other than that, he's been awesome, and I will be taking the over of his kicking points. Eat it.
Did you tell the people who he plays for?
Nope.
Who does he play for?
The Jaguars.
Okay.
Because they were smart enough to use a draft pick on a picker.
On a picker? A draft pick on a picker. All right, well, you do your kicker props. I'm going to take Drew Lock less than 183.5.
I like it.
Passing yards. I just think there's a lot of ways where this hits. I already mentioned he's dealing with a shoulder injury, got an MRI after last week's game. Neighbors didn't practice this week yet. Tyrone Tracy, their top receiving back, not practicing. Center's not practicing. They're motivated to lose the game. We got rain. We got wind. It's just, there's so many ways where it doesn't work out. I also think there's a non-zero chance he gets benched in this game. If they even start to get close to a lead, it's like Tommy DeVito, get in there. So there's injury outs. Obviously, you're concerned. If Neighbors sits, I mean, the 3 wide receiver set's going to be your boy Wandale, Jalen Hyatt, I think, and Darius Slayton, with the backup center potentially. So give me the less on Drew Lock.
That was Borg versus Betz presented by DraftKings Pick 6. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use the code BALLERS.
Ballers.
That's code BALLERS for new customers to play $5 and get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Betz, sign us off.
Yes, I think this week is challenging, but if you're plugged into Discord and the DFS Pass with the updated weather type stuff going on, projections, best plays, all that stuff, we got you covered. Good luck this weekend. Enjoy the 3-game Saturday slate, as well as this gross Sunday slate, and the Monday night preview will be up in the DFS Pass for Lions and Niners.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 18 and over. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits expire in 6 months. Limited time offer. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.